Okay, so the next one we're talking about is JOANNA HOGG's latest film, The Souvenir, which premiered at Sundance Film Festival earlier this year. It was also at the Edinburgh International Film Festival, and we talked a little bit about it in the Take One special. So also ask you can go back and see. There's about 5 other people who talked about their opinions on this, and I think we might have an interesting sort of debate. There was an interesting debate then, and there might be an interesting debate this time. And it comes into theaters in the UK August 30th. It is said to be a semi-autobiographical film about Hogg's own experience in film school. It's starring Honor Swinton Byrne, Tilda Swinton's daughter, Tom Burke, and Tilda Swinton herself. I love films with Tilda Swinton. Maybe that's my problem. The main character is Julie, played by Honor Swinton Byrne, a young, well-off young woman who is trying to make a film, attending film school. And much of the film shares this process of working with it seems to me somewhat pretentious film teachers. She's also coming from like this well-off background, so there's a lot of commentary about elite people and their lives and whatnot, but it's in a somewhat of an empathetic way. At some point, she meets an older man who works for the Foreign Office and who's played by Tom Burke, and the film really eventually moves into this like story of a toxic relationship, and we can go into more detail about that, but that kind of takes her away from her film process. But I find it interesting that the 3 films that we are talking about are about filmmakers. They're about filmmaking. Some of them are about heroin. So, but it is interesting because this is coming from the younger perspective of looking back on your life and when you were first starting, and the inspirations and the trials that you did versus Pain and Glory, which is about kind of the end of your career. But I really loved it. I mean, I got also this idea of shooting on film. She shot a lot of it on 16 millimeter, I think, and then parts of it with a 16 millimeter kind of lens or a filter or something. But I just thought it was really like it was beautiful. I loved the soundtrack. I loved the acting in it, and I think like it's not meandering, but it's quiet and quite stunning. And I think I'll watch it again and find more life. And I thought it was quite lovely. How about you guys?
I liked it. I don't know how apparently there is a sequel coming out, and I don't know if I want to see it because I think this is right. Am I right?
Well, it says part 2, but I thought that was a joke. Is that not?
No,
true?
It's got a Wikipedia page.
Oh.
It's happening. Yeah.
Okay.
But I'm not sure I want to see that second film, not because I didn't like this film, but because I think there's something complete about this film. I thought the format was interesting, the 16 mil. The drawbacks that I felt, first of all, was I do think is it has the languid pace and air of a Merchant and Ivory film, which they're good films, but actually they're great to watch on a Sunday, but not during the week. And I think you're right about the filmmaking classes. The performances in this film are super interesting in, I hate to bring up his name, but in a Ken Loach kind of way, in the sense that they're so naturalistic to the point where
absolutely.
Those filmmaking scenes, those sessions, are really sometimes awkward. But at the same time, performances are great. Tom Burke is great yet again at playing a twat. But time is really interesting in these films we've been watching. This film is a Victorian film set in the late 70s, early 80s.
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
And to the point where the framing is something like The Souvenir. It's a reference to a little painting from the 1700s or something. And then some of those shots, if you guys remember, of the main character sat sick in her bed that has a golden frame.
Right, it's like a throne.
Yeah, and then the very fact that Tilda Swinton's in it, that's a Victorian film. But I think, that's what I initially thought, and I think the narrative structure is super interesting. Particularly with Tom Burke's character, the the conversations usually are like in that wide sort of shot, like hardly any close-ups, except when people are sort of connecting through touch, and it's like a miracle. It's like when the people are touching each other, just like these really grainy, noisy shots of like their hands and stuff like that. But then the way it treats its characters is still detached, and not to spoil anything, but Tom Burke's fate is, as Tilda Swinton says, the worst. He sort of like really goes down that heroin road. But the way his character is dealt with is like, it's like he's in the film and a lot of the shots are of the back of his head, but then like he slowly like dissipates from the narrative. But he sort of just disappears from the story, and that's his end. And I thought that was interesting. Yeah,
he disappears from the story, much like my interest in the story. So first off, like because honestly, I'm going to try and keep it short, because the special we did during the festival, I rambled on about this film then, and I'm going to try and not subject you all to it again. First things first, the performances are great. It's a beautifully made film. You can tell that Hogg is a filmmaker who has a clarity of vision, and the way that she wants to present her characters is very deliberate, and it tells a story quite well. That I'm not, any criticism I have of it, don't let that detract from it. However, the backdrop to this story is just so impossibly dripping with privilege that it becomes incredibly distracting. Now, the film wants to deal with this, right? It has, in particular, so basically the film that Honor Swinton Byrne's character is trying to make is basically a sort of an allegorical biography set in Sunderland, right? An area of the country that she admits she doesn't know much about, and naturally she gets questioned about how she's going to make this film. And when she tries to express what the film means to her, how she's going to make about it, at parties in her swanky Knightsbridge apartment, which we'll come back to, she can't do so, right? And that's an interesting aspect, this lack of ability to express yourself. However, it doesn't really... The privilege which seems to prevent her from making the film, right, because she maybe can't relate to it, it doesn't really do anything with it. And when you then bring in I think Anthony is the name of the character, it then starts to go, in my view, some slightly weird places with how they present that relationship, right? Because it then takes this relationship which develops into a toxic one. It starts off maybe as a little bit of like the mansplaining, as we call it. It starts off a little bit with that, and then it develops into something which is a lot more troubling. And it's almost like by the time we get to the end of the film, this is like the creative impetus. It is awoken the artist in her, and she can express herself. And I really have a problem with that arc. I have a problem with that message. And it drops in references to the privileged position of this character, but it's not, to me, it's not commentary. It's like trying to address it because they know that people like me are going to have a massive issue with it. The one that sticks out is, somebody says, oh, well, maybe you don't need to worry about budget in Knightsbridge, when she's trying to kind of like figure out how she's going to fund this film. But to me, it feels like it's paying lip service to it. It doesn't feel like a commentary to me. It's backdrop that are kind of like, okay, we've seen this, we've acknowledged it, but now we're going to move on.
See, I disagree, and I think I think about the difference between Sofia Coppola, who makes these films about rich elites all the time, and how I'm the number one critic of Sofia Coppola, and how not aware she is of her privilege, and where this has this kind of sense of awareness to it. And I think it's deep in every single moment of this film. The trips to Venice and sort of this borrowing of money and these little kind of, and the throne, and like the actual like art direction of this film has privilege all around it, but it also has it sort of in this empathetic way, which I think Hogg is known for, and in a lot of ways it was a very important part. I think I don't think it was just thrown in. To me, I didn't think so at all, and I actually think it was quite well handled.
Well, I think like Jim, you're right to a certain extent. I would agree to a certain extent. Like at the beginning, that there was literally a character who says, "Ooh, that smacks of privilege." I immediately, for at least for that segment of the film, I don't want to spend any more. I don't want to spend 2 hours in the company of these people. But I think the problem with the film in that regard is the fact that people are signposting all of this through dialogue. That people are literally, it's not just naturalistic. It's literally saying, this is the plot, by the way. Like, the filmmakers are saying, it's like, why don't you just deal with stuff that you know? This is all stuff that the film can tell visually. I think, like, the beauty of the arc is that it is someone that is way over, like, in over her head, and, like, it's like, I'm going to make a film about a working class person, like, in Sunderland, when, in fact, she's living a life. You know, Amanda, earlier you said, like, that, you know, like, she has this relationship, and it sort of makes her, you know, for at least 6 months, it sort of affects her filmmaking, that she's not attending class anymore. But ultimately, it ends up affecting her filmmaking in a very positive way. Despite the strife and struggle with Tom Burke's character, she finds the story to tell. You know,
this is, and I'm not gonna go on too long on this, right? Because I could, and I'm trying not to. That's kind of my problem with this. It's art. It's another portrait of, to create true art, you must suffer. And I've seen this story so many times, and no matter how well acted this version is of it, no matter how well shot this version is of it, it is that story. And I have an issue with that story, but even then, to me, it doesn't actually fully grapple with it in a meaningful way, to me.
Well, and I think when you're saying this idea of discussion, and that part of what I enjoyed about the film was the annoying discussion. And I'll tell you, I love the scene, and maybe this isn't reason, I love the scene with Richard Ayoade, who is, you know, talking about film school and why is it necessary, and, you know, and it sort of explains the heroin problem that, you know, that's in her relationship. It clarifies those kinds of things that, like, and that's the point. It's a discussion about filmmaking, which is so pretentious, but that is who we are, you know, as filmmakers. And I think, like, it becomes, we're talking right here about filmmaking over and over and over again. And I think it's calling into question that and kind of making light of that. It's also making light of it's not making light of it. It's making the fact that, you know, that these people who are privileged have those kinds of privileged problems, and it's discussing it. It's not, it's, you know,
but I think like some of those dialogue scenes could have been cut a little bit, because, like, if you can,
I hope they're not.
But if you look at it in contrast, those dialogue scenes to, for example, if you guys remember the shot when her parents are over in the flat, and there's a beautiful shot of her father's, you know, sitting at the table with one of those mirrors sort of cracked. That's telling a story right there, and the film knows how to do that, and it knows how to use silence. It's just that, for me, if there's one detraction,
that film is lost in translation. There's very little conversation in that, where, like, you have all these, like, lyrical shots and stuff, and I don't think that's this film. I think this film is people in conversation over their, you know, issues of filmmaking, which is slightly silly.
That's fair. I just think they should have been just like it. I mean, this is not Quentin Tarantino overindulgence. I just thought, like, Jim, just calm it down.
No, I mean, it's still overindulgence. It's just of a different flavor. The thing is, I as I've said earlier, this show, right? This is what I always seem to come down to with this. I would encourage people to see it, right? Because I've seen so many different reactions to this. I think mine is one of the strongest against it I've come across. You know, I saw it at a press screening at the film festival, and I heard people around me talking about it. Honest to God, I thought I'd watched a different film. But what I will say is it's a very well-made film, right? I cannot, for all the issues I might have with the narrative and the way some of the characters are presented, I cannot fault the filmmaking itself. I can't fault the performances and how genuine they come across in trying to paint the characters that they are. So there is a very sincere aspect to this film, which I think is worth seeing for that. My issue is just my reaction to it. In some ways, when it drops in these things related to the privilege of the people there, I'd actually, in some ways, prefer they hadn't done that. Because if it was a story of privileged people with their, you know, very, you know, upper class British problems and, you know, related to, in her case, her filmmaking career, that's fine. I mean, you know, these people exist, they have problems, and those I'm not saying those stories shouldn't be told. My issue is it feels like it's trying to address concerns which it didn't need to, and in doing so, it acknowledges they're there, and then doesn't do anything with them. That's really my issue with it. The film itself, though, is impeccably made. There is plenty to recommend the film. My issue is just I found the backdrop to the story and how it acknowledges that backdrop, but then doesn't really grapple with it or deal with it as I would have liked. And, you know, I mean, that's tough luck. I didn't make the film. It doesn't, you know, it's not a film made for me. That, to me, I then just find it incredibly distracting from then engaging with the characters in the way that I think I was supposed to.
Yeah. Well, I disagree, but, you know, I've said what I've said. I agree with you, Luca, that I feel like that Victorianness of this film and the way that it was shot is just quite lovely. I can't wait to see it again. Give it some time.
And part two.
Give it maybe part two. I really thought that was a joke.
No, it is. It's up on IMDb.
That was my weird part. Where I was like, "What, part two?
Yeah.
Like, what are you, Back to the Future?"
Yeah, no, it's in post production apparently.
Oh,
yeah.
okay, all right. Well,
So
I guess
there
there's a
you go.
lot more to talk about privilege then. Well, anyway, so you see, we have multiple opinions on this, and choose for yourself.